Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wild Health Podcast. Dr. Jeff Graham hosting this week, and I am super excited to have a guest who I share a lot of personal passions with and has had an incredibly diverse career up to this point. So we were just joking. We could probably spend a good 3 hours just starting to scratch the surface on what he has done in his life, but thrilled to be introducing Dr. Thom Mayer today. He's the medical director for the NFL Players Association, Executive Vice President of Leadership for Logix Health, founder of Best Practices, Inc., speaker for Executive Speakers Bureau, and clinical professor of emergency medicine at George Washington University, and also a senior lecturing fellow at Duke University. He's one of the most widely sought speakers on healthcare patient experience, leadership, and management, hardwiring flow, trauma and emergency care, pediatric emergency care, and then EMS and disaster medicine, which I'm super excited to hear about. Has a special interest, obviously, in sports medicine, where his work has been at the forefront of changing concussion diagnosis and management in the NFL, and has changed the way in which these athletes are diagnosed and treated. I was telling Tom before I let you introduce yourself, I was able to dig into ChatGPT and find kind of a nice summary, I felt like. And here's what ChatGPT has to say about you. Dr. Thom Mayer's career exemplifies a blend of clinical expertise, leadership, and a commitment to improving both healthcare and sports medicine. His influence extends beyond emergency rooms to the fields of professional sports and healthcare management, making him a respected figure in multiple domains.
Well, thank you for that gracious introduction. I had never seen that from ChatGPT. It just shows you they're going to get it wrong.
I don't know.
It was very gracious. Thanks, Jeff. I'm thrilled to be on. I love the work you guys are doing at Wild Health. I think it's cutting edge and really where medicine needs to go.
Well, we hope so. That's really what we're hoping to do. And we've got a lot we could get into today, but I was thinking we'd kind of structure this talking about some of your experiences, what got you where you are, that led you down this path, and then transition into some of your leadership expertise, because that's what I'm really most curious about, being in a leadership position here now. I think we all face challenges with that at the organizational level, and it seems like you've based a lot of your work on how to make organizations efficient, but also still deliver a super high level of care. So I'm hoping we can dig into that some as well.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, you and I have always had what I would call a healthy disrespect for the status quo ante. And that takes courage to do that, because when you say, hey, I'm not saying this isn't great, I'm just saying it could be greater, it could be better, then that's discomforting to a lot of folks, particularly folks in leadership positions in the C-suites around the country, and no matter, not just in healthcare, but anywhere else. So I think we share that sense of, hey, let's make things better.
Yeah, I love it. And that's what we're all about. We always feel like there are screws we can tighten that will optimize the person, the organization, whatever goal you're going after, just get you a couple more millimeters there. I want to start out just asking you, with this kind of diverse career, like what early on, what were the influences in your life that got you interested in medicine in general, and then maybe as that progressed, what was your first passion? Was it sports? Was it this kind of trauma response? Was it leadership? What was the thing you saw yourself going into along the way?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story, but to a purpose, I hope. I played football. I was a linebacker, as you can probably tell, looking at me. Loved it. Wanted to play professional football. That was my goal when I was a kid in high school. Most people who play in college essentially play football in order to go to college, meaning they get a scholarship and get their education paid for. I was exactly the opposite. I went to college to play football. And by that, I mean, you're done with high school. You can't go to the pros, even now, directly to the pros. So, I got to college and, fortunate, started as a linebacker early on. As a freshman, that was kind of unheard of in those days, particularly for a middle linebacker, who's sort of the quarterback of the defense. Usually that's a senior level position or junior. And a third of the way through the season, the coach came to me and said, "Hey, Tom, I talked to your academic advisor and you don't have a major." And I said, "A major what? You didn't say anything about a major when you were recruiting me." No, you have to have a major field of study. So, all right, fine. So I chose theology, strangely enough.
Wow.
For a couple of reasons. I was always interested in how people think, why they think, how they interact, and those issues. And to be candid, you didn't have to take tests. All you did was write papers and sit under trees and talk. And I thought, hey, I'm playing football. I got a scholarship. Now I got this skate major that I was in. But my junior year, or I should say at the end of my sophomore year, two professors, my theology advisor and a biology professor whose name is Dr. Prey, which, there's allegorical as Dante, said, "Have you ever thought about being a doctor?" And to me, it was like, doctor? I mean, doctor to me was somebody that sewed up my lacerations or unfortunately stuck his finger in a place that didn't belong and said, "Turn your head and cough." And I thought, I don't want to be, who wants to do that? But I trusted these guys. So junior year, I'm taking freshman level pre-med courses, including Chemistry 101. And that's taught by Dr. Keith White. And he's the chairman of the department. It was going okay. First test. And the first question on the first test, it's 100 questions on this test. First question is, a mole is Avogadro's number of particles, and then A, B, C, D, E, 5 responses.
Yeah.
I never heard of Avogadro. He's got a number? Who knew he had a number? What is the number? A mole? I mean, I thought that was a critter that tore up your lawn that you had to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
So I had no idea, and so I just started guessing. I didn't even read the rest of the questions. I thought, if I don't know that one, I'm not going to know any of them. So I just went A, B, C, D, E, E, D, C, B, A. And in football, if you have slant and go route, where you slant and go, we call that a sluggo route. And my answer sheet looked like a sluggo route because it just kept going back and forth like this. But at the end, I finished the 100 questions because I didn't read them. And at the end, it's got a blue envelope, and it says in that envelope, on the front of it, it says, bonus question, if you get this right, you get an A on this test, no matter what you did on the first 100 questions. I thought, hey, how bad? It's not out of a Avogadro. It couldn't be any worse than that. And so I open it up, and it reads verbatim, what's the name of the man who cleans this room every night so you can have a great place in which to learn?
Oh, wow.
And so I walked up. By the way, was I the first person done? You bet. If you don't read the questions, it does not take very long to put a sluggo down. So I walked up to Dr. White, and I had the piece of paper in my hand, and I said, Dr. White, this bonus question. He smiled and said, yep. And I said, do you want his first name or his last name? He looked at me and he said, Tom, if you can give me his first name and his last name, I'll not only give you an A in this test, I'll give you an A in this course, as long as you show up and as long as you do your work. And I said, well, what if I can give you his wife's name and the names and ages of his 6 kids?
Oh, wow.
He stood up, took his glasses off, how you point with your glasses sometimes, and said, if you can do that, I'll not only give you an A in this course, I'll give you an A in every chemistry course I teach. And he was as good as his word, and I was as good as mine. And so what's my point? To the point that you asked me, I became a doctor not because I was smart or I worked hard or anything like that. It was because of a janitor that cleaned the room, the chemistry lab in the college I went to. So I owe my MD degree to him. Roosevelt Richmond is his name. He died a few years ago. So it's funny how passions will help move you over time. Once I got into medicine, I was just absolutely drawn to acute care, trauma, critical care. The sicker, the better. It's not that I want them to be sick, but when it's time for somebody to come in and be calm and say, I got this, I know how to handle this, I wanted to be that guy. So that's how I ended up in emergency medicine, disaster medicine, and all the related areas.
Wow. Did you keep in touch with Roosevelt?
I did, until he passed away, and still keep in touch with his kids.
That's fantastic. I was not expecting that out of the gate. Wow. You just changed the trajectory of this. So what a great humanitarian story, on top of asking you about medical school and what got you there. That's really, wow. It's touching, man. So as we're going through, you found yourself drawn to acute care, to I like the sicker the better. I can definitely relate to that from my time in academics, working in the hospital. That was so much. There's a real drive there, right? There's, as far as you want to see people get better, but it also is so intellectually stimulating on a level, and to come in and be able to provide services that you feel like are really high level, and watch people improve. How did that transition, from that kind of stuff? What led then into the special interest? Obviously, you had the interest in sports. It was personal. Was there a case or a time that you saw someone with a concussion or a sports-related injury that really started pivoting you that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I always stayed busy, active. I was always interested in football. But the tipping point, if you will, the inflection point, a lot of different ways to say it, but was August 1st, 2001. Corey Stringer, tackle for the Vikings, died of heat stroke. Yeah. Inconceivable, but that's what happened. And people say to me, Tom, how do I build my resume to get a job like yours as the medical director for the NFL Players Association? And my answer is, I got that job because Gene Upshaw, arguably the best left tackle in football, Hall of Fame member, but also the executive director of the NFL Players Association, called me up and said, Doc, you got to take this job. He didn't ask you. He told you, you got to take this job. Why did he do that? Well, he didn't do it because he flipped through resumes. Even in 2001, first of all, we didn't know what Chat GPT was. We can't flip through the internet. He did it because we were best friends. And we were best friends because his youngest and our youngest, Greg, were extremely close friends. And we had spent time coaching T-ball together, lots of dinners, too much Silver Oak Cabernet. He was a huge fan of that. So my point is, don't build resumes, build relationships, regardless of where you are in life. Not that resumes don't have a place. We can talk about that if we have time. But that really was the inflection point, because he said, look, you got to step up. And I said, well, what's your current medical director going to think? And he said, we don't have one. We've never had one. So for the past 23 years, I've had the honor of representing the health and safety interests of 1,500 active NFL players every year. 10,000 I calculated up in total over that time. And it's just been a thrill, absolute thrill.
So glad to hear that passion. That actually is a great segue to my next question, because that was something I was interested in thinking about. Here you said 1,500 at any given time. Is that correct? Yeah. So, given the physical demands, the high velocity impacts, it's as an extreme a sport as I can think of, and the stresses these guys put their bodies through. Basically, how do you sleep at night? How do you feel? How are you protecting that many players? What are some of the things you've instituted along the way to help ensure safety for that many?
Yeah, so to correct myself, it's 1,500 per week because there's 48 active on the roster times 32 teams. But if you take the full roster, the 53, we always say, did you make the 53? 53-man roster plus the P squad, practice squad, often called the taxi squad. There's a funny story about that if we get to it. But, I sleep really, really well. And the reason is that we have certain principles. And one is health and safety are not negotiable. Number two, we'll go anywhere the science takes us, but nowhere the science doesn't. And number three, whole player, whole life, whole family. So that we're dealing with them not just while they play football. And so that lens of science and saying, who do I represent? I represent 2,500 or 1,500 per week player patients. And, my counterpart represents what? 32 billionaires. That's a different job. I mean, both football related, both completely honorable, I think, but that's just a different focus, different job and how we do it. Just like you represent your patients. You stand for their voice and what's best for them. When they ask about anything, as you know, huge emphasis these days on GLP-1 agonists. And what does that mean? You stand for your patient when you talk about that, just as I do when it comes to concussion. That we remember, through the vague haze of the first year of medical school, that force equals mass times acceleration. Well, our guys, as you know very well, are bigger than they've ever been, and they're faster than they've ever been. So what's happening? The forces are going up. What are we going to do about that? What are we doing about that? We're mitigating against those forces, just as that Peloton behind you mitigates against potential cardiovascular risk. It boosts your VO2 max. You know better than I do, single best determinant of all-cause mortality in every decade of life is VO2 max. Mm-hmm. So we're really doing the same thing. We're just doing it with a different population and a slightly different focus. So I would say you and I probably both sleep pretty well.
I do, but I don't know if I would if I had your job. So kudos to you. Let's actually use that example, and I'm so glad you let me walk right into this, because I wanted to take advantage of your medical knowledge around concussion care. I'm gonna tell you a story of a 17-year-old, may or may not have been me, who was playing safety and was knocked out, taking on a tailback who came through at full speed. And I played high school ball, but big game, competitive conference I was in. But I remember I got knocked out, kind of got shaken awake, taken to the sidelines. This was, mid 90s, checked out by a doc for maybe 2 minutes and was in playing again on the next set of downs. I think we've all heard stories like that. And that's just want to kind of use that as a baseline of, at mid 90s and at a high school level. Tell me, I know there's been just a massive amount of information with my sports medicine background. I've treated a lot of concussions. I just want to hear from you, what are the latest and greatest things that are happening now with concussion care?
Well, by way of background, the experience you had is not uncommon. Clearly, in retrospect, you had a concussion and you were put right back into the game. Well, as you know, with kids, and you didn't like to think of yourself as a kid in high school, but we were. Second impact syndrome is a massive issue. As you know, when you get that second hit and your vasculature is already not auto-regulating the way it should, and suddenly you've got massive edema. Well, when I started in 2001, that same policy was in place in the NFL. You could go back in the same game with a documented concussion. And so the first thing we did is change the culture of concussion, help people understand. When I go to this day, I do a lot of work with former players, and I go to a former player convention. There's 200 people in the audience, 200 wives in addition. And I say to the guys, how many of you, when you played, had a concussion? Maybe one or two will raise their hand. I say, well, how many of you got lit up? How many of you saw stars? How many of you got knocked out? How many of you don't remember part of a game? And, everyone's hands go up, and often the wives will raise their other hand. So they got both hands up in the air. So, it's that change of culture of understanding what it is, understanding what can be done about it. My hope, my dream, yours too, is 5 years from now, we're going to look back at how we currently diagnose concussion and think, well, that was dumb. I mean, wow. And that'll be a combination of things. It may be point of care testing, saliva, that kind of thing, different forms of EEG technology, different forms of convergence, eye findings that we're able to do that right now it's not that we don't do a good exam. We mandate the guidelines, which did not go over well. The NFLPA wrote those guidelines, not the NFL. And it didn't sit well with the NFL at the time. That was a different group of people. But, I think having the courage to say, good is never good enough. We have to constantly, iteratively force those guidelines forward for the good of the players. Our helmets are completely different. The helmets you and I wore in high school, I wish I played high school football in the 90s. I predated that considerably. But at any rate, even the helmets, when I started in the NFL in 2001, none of those are in use today. And we don't allow them to be in use. So I think you're going to see more and more technology-based solutions, not just among shoulder pads, but, how do we mitigate against lower extremity injuries, ACL injuries, MCL injuries, high ankle sprains, which I hate that term because it sounds like it was just a sprain. But as you know, a syndesmotic ligament tear is a big deal. So I think you're going to see more and more. And while our efforts are focused on NFL players, over time, it's going to trickle down to college players, to high school players, and even to youth football.
Any new research that you're aware of that's evolving in the world of CTE?
More and more is being done. I think, we're used to the pendulum swinging back and forth. And so there was this pendulum swing when it was first described, Bennett Amalu and Julian Bales. They were vilified. The NFL, as you may know, demanded that they rescind their paper and rescind their findings. Then it became, well, something's going on here, and more common, and great research from Boston University and Bob Cantu and Chris Nowinski and Bob Stern. And it began to be clear that there's a neuropathological diagnosis. And McKee led the way, at least I feel that way. Now, NIH recognizes, but it's still only a post-mortem diagnosis. There's no ante-mortem test, pre-death test. There was a lot of ballyhoo about PET scanning and the specific tracer for that. But studies that we helped fund with Harvard showed, number one, they couldn't replicate the findings with that tracer. And number two, and people miss this, is that tracer preferentially binds with neuromelanin and makes it appear that there are tau lesions where there really aren't tau lesions because of the preferential binding to neuromelanin. Well, 75% of my guys are black. So that's, makes you wonder about that. Will we get there someday? Sure. Will we have antibodies, cis-tau antibodies? I think we will. The Harvard group is working on that. Some other folks are as well. So it's a combination of decreasing that force, mitigating that force so that you're better protected, all the way down to how do we either prevent those lesions from developing or deliver antibody to break up the tau prior to its sort of final deposition. That makes sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah, tau's a hot topic now. It's just tau, yeah. So tell me about, you've described some of the evolutions in player protection and early diagnosis and keeping people safe after a concussion. How has your role evolved? I know you were very instrumental in setting those guidelines up. How has your role evolved since 2001 during that time? Are you seeing less of certain injuries? Are you doing more building guardrails for other things? I think concussions are the things that probably get the most, make the most headlines when we think about NFL.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you used the term guardrails because, when we first proposed the concussion guidelines, they were opposed. This is a predecessor among both head, neck, and spine committee chairs and leadership. So it's a different group of people. I'm not criticizing the folks that we currently work with. That's a great relationship. But, they said we don't need them. The NFL docs are the best docs in the world. Well, show me the data that proves that, particularly when it comes to concussion evaluations. I'm an emergency physician. I'm a trauma doc. I mean, in Asheville, North Carolina, or in Durham, North Carolina, or the level 1 trauma center that I ran for 20 or 30 years, they're going to be resuscitated exactly the same way by the ACLS guide, or I'm sorry, ATLS, Advanced Trauma Life Support Guidelines, whether it's in an academic medical center or a community hospital. So guidelines are guardrails. And I think that's a critical way to look at whatever we do. So guidelines are guardrails, keeping us safe, keeping us on the road, keeping us from falling over that cliff. We live in Wyoming. There's lots of cliffs, and thank God there's a lot of guardrails. And I think we have to think about it that way. So that's the concussion piece. But if you look at the changes in how tackling is done, eliminating, to the extent that we can, helmet-to-helmet collisions, there's position-specific helmets for O and D linemen, padded more on the front of the helmet, but there's also ones for quarterbacks padded in the back, because a significant number of quarterback concussions are head to ground with that rotatory angular acceleration which occurs. Yeah. But the same thing has happened with Lex injuries. There's 7,000 injuries in the NFL each year, and only 2,500 players. Well, it's a 100% injury rate any way you look at it. But about 2/3 of them are lower extremity injuries. So we found, looking very carefully and working with Mark Verstegen, who founded Exos, probably familiar with them, that if you brought people into a training camp and had a mandated ramp up, so that they didn't go from 0 to 60, and they didn't put pads on as soon as they got there, and they didn't start wind sprints as fast as they got there, that the number of lower extremity or Lex injuries were dramatically decreased. And to the extent that we put them on force plates and video them, and can show that when those injuries occur, particularly hamstring injuries, it's the rapid deceleration, that eccentric force, eccentric force, I should say, that is causing a lot of those hamstring tears. And look at it this way: the last 6 Super Bowl winners have had the lowest number of lower extremity injuries in the early season. So, it makes sense. If you keep the 1s and 2s, the starters and the other guys on the field, your chances of winning are higher.
Yeah, 100%. So what I hear you saying is this kind of graduated introduction to a new level of stress that they're
exactly
about to undergo. Okay.
Yeah, and I think your patients and your listeners, they're used to that. You want folks to get off the couch. Yeah, you say, okay, hey, let me show you this graph from JAMA showing that VO2 max is it's the deal, the real deal. There is a miracle drug for aging, and it's called exercise. And it always has been. But they don't go from 0 to a 45-minute hit exercise with Alex Toussaint on that Peloton. You kind of gradually work that up.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, another question that I definitely had coming into this is, I can't imagine the psychological toll of the rigorous amount of exercise, the stresses these guys are put under on a weekly basis. So in your experience working with these elite athletes, is there what is the toll that takes on these players? And then are there support mechanisms in place within the NFL if people are having psychological problems along the way? I imagine there's probably quite a bit.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. As part of our CBA, collective bargaining agreement, so if I use that term, you already knew what that meant, but in case your listeners didn't, we built in the necessity of having behavioral health joint committee between the NFLPA and the NFL, that they have team clinicians, psychologists, PhDs, master's level with at least 7 years of experience in the building, so that they can deal with these issues when they come up. Because think about a couple of things, and I know you have, but number one, our guys have defeated the impossible their whole lives. They've always been on the right end of the bell-shaped curve. You're a great youth football player, but let's see what happens when you get to high school. Yeah, you're pretty good in high school, but let's see if you can play in college. And on and on. And they always beat the odds. They were always the ones who were told no, and they made it yes. Now you get there, and the average length of a career in the NFL is 3.5 years still.
Wow.
And that's the mean. So think about, the Tom Brady's, Matthew Slater, a special teams player that just retired but played 17, 18 years. You start taking those, and yet the mean is 3.5, you're going to have a lot of onesies and twosies. I mean, that's just the way it works. And so when you build that in, the way I explain that to physicians, and particularly NFL physicians, is like ask them a simple question. I said, guys, you worked hard to get to where you are. You're at the top of your profession. You're all elite level physicians. What if somebody walked in one day and said, hey, Jeff, really appreciate you. You've been great, but give me your ID, give me your stethoscope, give me your white coat, clean out your locker. You're done.
Yeah.
And, eyes get wide and sphincters tighten and heart rates go up, because that's what happens to most of my players. They don't retire. Some of them do. Most of them are retired. They're told, clean out the locker, give me your playbook and all that. Two, and you've thought about this, but I'd really like your audience, particularly the physical therapists, folks who are involved in rehab, to think about this. These guys get to where they are, and all of a sudden, bam, Achilles injury, bam, ACL injury, bam, you name it, shoulder labrum tear. And now all of a sudden, in those cases, probably they're not going to be playing the rest of the year. There's a huge psychological impact, behavioral health impact to that. And I think you're going to see us start to measure that more over time. When I talk to the most elite surgeons, Jimmy Andrews, Neil Elatrace, all that group of people, and talk to them about this issue, they say, oh yeah, one of the most critical people on our staff are our therapists, because they're healing them physically, but they're also healing them psychologically. They're working through, can I trust that ACL repair? Can I trust that Achilles tear? And you see Aaron and you see Kirk Cousins coming back from that. It takes tremendous mental toughness to be able to do that, and the will to do it. So I think you're going to see more and more, not just out of the National Football League and the Players Association, but at the college level, at every level. How do we build in to me, I would call it neuropsychological, not just psychological, but the neuropsychological attributes to make sure that, what we do, and we're not injecting dopamine or oxytocin, but we know those chemicals are at work. And so how do we put that in play to create the most favorable milieu for healing?
Yeah. And I would imagine on the other side of that, for those players you're describing who aren't retired because of injury, but are retired because, hey, there's someone younger and better that's coming up. And I imagine there's a real loss of ego and meaning for those players. I mean,
well, they have to work through it. And some of them are amazingly prepared. Some of them aren't. A lot of our players do very, very well. At the last Super Bowl, I saw Emmitt Smith and Joe Theismann, among many others. Guys that really have done extremely well in their post-career. But they were prepared for it. The foundation was laid for it. Many of our men, I would say the majority of our men, go back to become leaders in their communities, whether that's where they grew up or where they at final days of their playing days were. And they're huge, huge leaders in the communities that they're in. But they'd be the first ones to say it's work.
It's work, yeah. You are just reading this podcast perfectly, because that's a great segue to think about another area of your expertise, and that is leadership. And I wonder how some of those lessons that these guys learn at that level translate into leadership in their community or the setting that they move on to. Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, I just, as you may know, just wrote a book, the title of which is Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless, what I learned from 9/11, the NFL in Ukraine. And it's not meant to be a clever title. If it is, it's either too clever or not clever enough by half. But the point is, like you, I'm a leadership maven. I've read tons of stuff, heard multiple people talk many times. And yet, to me, the reason for the title is simple. Leadership is worthless because it's just what you say. It's just words. Anybody can say anything they want. But leading is priceless because it's what you do all day, every day. Now, I've had the honor of leading in some of the most prominent crises of our generation. But that's not the point. The point is we all have crises in our lives, and we're all leading all day, every day. So to me, my plea is the leader you're looking for is you. The answers are not above us. They're within and among us. And so every single mom is a leader. She's leading that family. Every older sibling is a leader to their younger siblings. Role modeling, leading by their actions, not just what they say, but what they do. And I think it's an insight for all of us, and it helps us understand that we have to think, act, and innovate. We have to think about leading in a different way. We have to act on those thoughts within a week, because if we don't do it within a week, it's not going to happen. It just isn't. That's human nature. And third is we have to innovate, because the way we're working isn't working, or isn't working well enough, or isn't working as well as it could. As you say, if you tighten the screws and make sure the struts are the way they should be, marginal improvements, but to maximal performance. Mark Verstegen, we talked about, always says simple things done savagely well. And I think that's us. We got to do simple things savagely well, but it doesn't. Shouldn't be an appeal to people in the C-suite. It's an appeal to the people in the we-suite. Everyone needs this.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. I've heard do ordinary things extraordinarily.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the same. Yeah. And I love that as a mantra for daily living. So in your own experience, is that how you have learned to lead? Has it mainly been through these innovative, almost kind of intuitive changes you've had to make in your own experience? Or did you sit down with a stack of books this big and, just begin reading about leadership?
Well, I did both, but
Okay.
most of it comes from experience, as you know, and no criticism of anybody, but when I read a leadership book by a professor who's researched all these different companies and talked to all these different CEOs, let me talk to somebody who's been there.
Yeah.
Let me talk to somebody who's been that entrepreneur. Let me talk to somebody who's at work, closed the door and put your head down on the desk and thought, I can't believe this isn't working. But because it's really in the crucible of activity that I think things occur. Again, no offense to anyone when I say that. When I talked to Mike Krzyzewski, who wrote a beautiful quote for the book, I know you're a UNC fan. I don't mean to, rile you up here by talking about Coach K.
No.
And it was so generous a quote that I called him back and said, Mike, are you sure you read the right book? But, that's a guy who's been through it, just as Roy Williams, so I could get that plug in. Those are people you want to listen to. We had dinner the other night with Nick Saban. I mean, that was a lot of fun to personally hear his stuff. But the same is true of everybody who forms a new company, a new idea. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, and no intent to be pandering. But Jeff, what you guys have done with Wild Health is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But it takes frickin' hard work to do it, to make sure that the idea becomes a reality, and that the people that you're enrolling, whether it to the podcast or your practice, see a benefit from it and say to others, I want to lead this way. So I think including leading, I'll say that instead of leadership, as a major part of what you do is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you for those gracious words. Can you give us an example maybe of thinking about a way that you think about innovation within a workplace to foster growth, to point a place in the direction where you want to go. Are there any quick hitters that you kind of rely on?
First of all, innovation doesn't occur at the speed. Innovation is essential because the way we're working isn't working. You and I have this healthy disrespect for the status quo ante, and I think probably everyone listening to this podcast does, as well as the folks in your practice, number one. Number two, innovation doesn't occur at the speed of genius, intelligence, creativity. No offense to Elon Musk, Stephen Jobs, anybody like that. It occurs at the speed of trust, because if people don't trust you, they won't step outside the lines and try something. And that's critical. So that the corollary to innovation at the speed of trust is to make failure your fuel, to be able to take failure and look at it and say, okay, didn't work. Why didn't it work? Or it worked to this extent. Why did it work to this extent and not beyond that? And our guys do that in the National Football League. Our players spend 3 to 5 times more time breaking down film, figuring out how they failed and how they're going to get better on the next play, the next snap, the next game, than they do on the practice field, the weight room, or the game field. I mean, that's stunning unless you live it the way they do. So that ability for each of us to do that. I mean, the problem is in many companies, many organizations, many families, the boss, and I capitalize that, is a person who thinks that he's the smartest person in the room, the most important person in the room. And the leader is someone who knows that her job is to make sure that everyone else on the team feels that they're the smartest, the most important person that you could have. I got an award a couple of years ago from the American College of Emergency Physicians, and they interviewed me and said, what's your talent? I said, look, I only have one talent. I know how to recruit, hire, and retain people that are much smarter than I am. They won all these awards, not me. And I think that's the kind of family you want to build. That's the kind of team you want to be on. That's the kind of company you want to have, where people are asking you, even demanding you to say, tell me how this could be better. How could I do my job better? How could we structure systems and processes better?
Yeah. Let's go back to that word you use, trust, and how you feel like that's such a foundational piece of leading. What's an example of a way that you see trust built within successful organizations?
Well, I think it starts with hiring right. I think I'm huge on mission, vision, and values, but at the same time, I will tell people, I do consulting. I don't do a lot of it, just for time reasons, but they'll say, well, talk to us about culture, innovation, accountability, all these kinds of things. And they said, well, we'll send you our mission, vision, and values. And my answer is, that's great, but I'm not going to read them, because I'm going to be there about 15 minutes and I'll tell you what your culture is. I'll tell you what the mission and vision and values are in the trenches, whether the trenches are an office, a factory, a hospital, an emergency department, an ICU, wherever it might out practice like yours. I mean, to me, it's not the words on the walls that matter. It's the happenings in the halls that matter. And when you begin to realize that innovation at the speed of trust, we have to make failure our fuel. Most of the time when the boss says, think outside the box, they don't mean that at all. What they mean is think inside my box. Think the way I'm thinking. Guess what I'm thinking. That is no way to live. And it's no way, in my opinion, to build a company, or a family, or anything else, or a clinical practice, whatever it might be. So helping them understand up front, you got 2 jobs. And we wrote a book called, there's a massive bull moose walking through my backyard, but I won't turn the camera around so you can see it. Sorry for the distraction there. But we wrote a book, Kirk Jensen and I wrote a book called Hardwiring Flow. What is hardwiring flow? It's taking systems and processes and saying 2 things. Number 1, stop doing stupid stuff. And we do a lot of stupid stuff, not just in healthcare, but in life. Number 2, start doing smart stuff. So the question is, who knows best what the stupid stuff is? People doing the work, not the C-suite, the people doing the work. That's number 1. But who also is going to be smart at devising the smart stuff? that's going to make our jobs easier and our patients or customers' lives better. It's the we suite. So it doesn't mean that the C-suite isn't important, but they're important in a different way. That, I always felt it was my goal and my role to create enzymatic catalytic reactions that allowed people to be creative, to think, to fail forward faster, to punish mediocre successes and reward excellent failures, as my friend Tom Peters says. And when you do that, we had very little turnover in our physician group, because they knew that they were going to be asked, "Hey, how can we do it better?"
I love that. So I love that term, using failures as fuel. I read a recent excerpt from, I think it was a Roger Federer interview recently, who said, talking about how great he was. He said, well, I wasn't that great. I really only won just over 50% of the points that I played, because that's all it took in tennis, right? You're just, and talking about that, that innovative, failing every other point and making a change in the moment to see things shift for hopefully the next serve. Do you have a particular story that stands out, or something you remember in your experiences that really exemplifies that, a failure that then was used as a launching pad to make a change within a system or within a group?
Yeah, with two things. One, you've seen it, I'm sure, but your audience needs to watch Abby Wambach's Barnard College commencement speech. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible. And Abby and I spoke at a couple meetings. I was the warm-up act and she was the real show, of course. But so I read that. But I can tell you, at the Pentagon, people ask me, tell me the most important lesson you learned at the Pentagon. I was the command physician at the Pentagon on 9/11, as you very graciously said. I got there, and my job is to keep the scene safe, to secure the scene, as it's known in disaster medicine, and so people could get into the building safely, to be able to rescue who we could and recover who we couldn't. So when I got there, what I always tell people, the lesson I learned is, stop sucking up, start sucking down. What do I mean by that? Again, clever, too clever, not clever enough, I don't know. But when I got there, there were 32 generals, two stars or above, standing behind me saying, "Doc, tell us what you need." Great folks. Those were their people in that building. And I could have spent 3 days, which I did at the Pentagon, sucking up to them, talking to them. I didn't do that, because I knew my role was to suck down to the structural engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers, the people shoring up that building to make sure it didn't collapse when people went inside of it to rescue it. Paramedics, firefighters, suppression, helicopters, all those people who technically answered to me, but I learned more from them than vice versa. And it was my job to help synthesize all that together to say, is the scene secure? And work with the incident commander. You're used to incident command structures and all that. So I think that's true for a lot of us, both in our organizations. We've all been on teams where players suck up to the coaches. They ain't going to work with very many coaches that I had anyway. It's the ability to adapt on a real-time basis that matters. And that knowledge is going to come from sucking down, not sucking up.
Yeah. I love that. It seems to be a theme with what you've learned in your life. I love what else you said. The words on the walls don't matter. It's the happenings in the halls. Was that it?
Yes.
I'm going to walk away with that one. That's great.
Oh, good.
That's great. How do you incorporate storytelling when it comes to healthcare leadership? What is you find that that's an effective modality?
Oh, storytelling is essential. I think it's essential in life, that any leader has to become the chief storyteller. W.H. Auden, in his brilliant lyrical poem Musée des Beaux-Arts, begins with, "About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position." And in physicians, and I bet pleaded with deans, including my own medical school, we have got to incorporate storytelling into the academic and, more importantly, what they see at the bedside. Because, number one, we need to tell the story to the patient about what their symptoms mean, how we're going to work it up, what those results will be. If they've got either cancer or a fear of cancer, then how many physicians know the term scanxiety? They have scanxiety. They're worried about what that scan shows. They're convinced it's going to show not appendicitis, but some kind of cancer that's in there. And certainly if you got cancer, and now we're doing repeat scans to see how it's going, if it takes 5 days to get the scan results, that's obscene, because they're sitting there they're convinced, it's got to be bad. At any rate, I think that leaders at all levels should be the chief storyteller to the patient, to the customer, as it may be, but also if you want change, and we all do, because the way we're working isn't working, or isn't working well enough, or as well as it could, just tighten the screws, as you said, then we've got to be able to tell their story to people that are in decision-making capacities, the C-suite, if you will. Simple example from emergency medicine. We have boarders. We have people that wait for hours to days, already admitted to the hospital, but can't get upstairs. And if I want to change that, I can quote statistics out the yin-yang, and they're true. I can say quality goes downhill, mortality goes up. Every measure of quality gets worse if you have to board. That's all well and good. But if I really want to make a change at the C-suite or at the board level, tell the story of the patient. Let me tell you about Mrs. Smith, this 85-year-old lady who's been in our hallways for 3 days waiting for a bed upstairs. So I think it's an essential feature for all leaders.
I love it. I'm going to really drop the big bomb on you here. And you've had so many years in medicine and leadership and different aspects of those two realms. What do you see as the major hurdle for change right now in our medical system?
Oh, by far the sense that I'm the boss, I'm in charge of the system, therefore the system is good. And that's never true. That's never true. Number one, you're not the boss, you're the leader. No system is perfect, never will be. That's the iterative nature of it, that constant feeling. Aristotle was right. He said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not a virtue, it's a habit. So we create a culture every day. I mean, you and I are creating a culture as we talk here. You create a culture every time you have an interaction with one of your patients. Anyone listening has an interaction with their patient, client, whatever it might be. And so the culture is iterative. It's recreated all day, every day. And so that getting over that obstacle to understand that, hey, I'm an emergency physician. If I'm running a resuscitation, I got to look up on the wall to see what I'm supposed to do or what my values are supposed to be. Something's wrong. Someone hasn't hired right. Someone hasn't said, tell us the stupid stuff, help us devise the smart stuff. So I think it's all tied together in that regard. And that obstacle really is contentment, which to me is a lack of curiosity.
Lack of curiosity. I think that's huge. A huge part of the broken part of our medical system right now. All right. As someone in a position that bridges leadership, sport, performance, what insight would you provide our listeners just for their daily lives?
Well, let's get away from the wistful word someday. Someday I'll be a leader. Let's embrace the aggressive, factual, useful word today. I want people to wake up, and as soon as they get up in the morning, open their eyes, swing their legs around, and say, today I will be a leader. How will I lead? Will I embody my values? When our boys were younger, we had 3 boys. I used to take them to school. And when I take them to school, I'd say, one more step in the journey of discovering where your deep joy intersects the world's deep needs. I swear I said this to them. They prefer to take the bus. They don't want to hear that stuff. But, you really have to start with your deep joy. You could have been a surgeon. You could have been a neurosurgeon. And I'm not trying to offend you in any way when I say things like that. Your deep joy is what you're doing. The entire wild health concept is a deep joy that you're pursuing. And so I think all of our people have to understand it. What is my deep joy? I wrote a book on burnout. What's burnout? Burnout's just the inability to feel your deep joy. And so how do we get back to that? That's easy. Lower job stressors and increase adaptive capacity. So helping each person listening to understand that, to embrace today, to leave someday behind because it's not going to help you. I think the term future leader is demonic, demeaning, toxic, should never be used. Why? Well, I'm a leader. Jeff and I are leaders. These poor people listening, maybe someday they'll be a leader. Oh, come on. Today they are leaders. The answers are not above, they're within and among us. So that helps tie it together to be able to say, yeah, I'm an emerging leader. I'm a developing leader, but I'm not a future leader. I'm a leader now. And I think we owe it to our patients to help them understand that, to not just fix what's wrong with them. How do we make this journey from, and I approach this with my patients all the time, moving from what's the matter with you, find it, fix it, to what matters to you? Mm-hmm. What matters to you? And I do that with my players in the league all the time because, we got MRI scans. I can tell you what's the matter with them, but I want to know what matters to them.
Boom. I think with that, I don't know if we can beat that, though. I feel like my last question is very selfish, but I want to ask you if I can just call you every morning for a little motivational talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what, to your audience, best way the book is available on Amazon and all that stuff. The only purpose of the book's to try to help you. The reason I come on things like this with guys like you is to try to help people. So if I can be of help to your audience, you, anyone else, easiest is email. It's just ThomMayerMD@gmail. And that's ThomMayerMD. So it kind of looks funny and spelled funny. But hey, if I can help, reach out anytime.
Fantastic, Thom. I really appreciate the offer. And it's just been a joy. As I predicted at the beginning here, I think I could go on for another couple of hours. And hopefully you'll consider coming back to
the answer is yes. The answer is yes. I can tell you when my phone rings and I don't recognize who it is, I answer it precisely the same way every time, which is, this is Dr. Mayer. The answer is yes. Now let's figure out what the question is.
I love it. I love it, man. Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed our time today. I know I have with Dr. Thom Mayer. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on the Wild Health Podcast. Hopefully we can have you back soon. Again, it's ThomMayerMD.com is his website, and that's Thom with a ThomMayerMD.com. I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast this week. Thom, thank you one more time. Hopefully we see you again soon.
Oh, it's an honor. The answer is yes. You tell me when and I'll be back. Appreciate you, brother. You're doing great work.
Oh, you too, man. You too. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.